One second, the husband was head over heels in love with his wife. The next second, he wanted her dead. On their wedding day, the bride found herself in the middle of a bloody game of hide-and-seek at her in-laws' house. The story began several hours earlier, when, for Grace, it should have been the happiest day of her life. But Becky's family was anything but normal. Aunt was stone-faced. Her mother-in-law Becky was full of worry, and her older brother Daniel was seriously trying to talk her out of it. Even Alex, her new husband, kept asking her repeatedly, "Are you sure you don't regret it? It's not too late to back out now." All this weirdness had one cause, a family tradition in the Ludomus family. On the wedding night, the bride must play a game with her husband's family. And the type of game? Well, that was entirely up to luck. Grace was confused. Why was this game more important than the wedding night itself? Alex hesitated and explained, "It's just some simple games, like checkers, or matching cards." But the terrifying part? Grace had incredibly bad luck that day and drew hide and seek. This was a game that sent chills down everyone's spine. Tony and his family's faces looked as if they had just eaten something utterly disgusting, although they weren't familiar with the game. One thing was clear, from now on, the family members who had never agreed on anything had to unite, or they would all die. Alex hadn't expected that on their first day of marriage, he would be forced to play a role in killing the woman he loved, all while Grace remained completely unaware. Tony told Grace that it was just a normal game of hide-and-seek. If she could hide until dawn without being found, she'd win. But in reality, hide-and-seek was a deadly hunting game. As soon as Grace left her room, the others were given weapons. Their mission? To find Grace and kill her before dawn. If Grace survived until morning, they would all face a terrible fate. To ensure fairness, all the building's surveillance systems were turned off, and since the groom couldn't play, they worried Alex might warn Grace. So, they assigned Alex's sister-in-law, Charity, to guard the door, but they forgot about the servant's secret passage inside the villa. While Alex tried to escape, Grace had already been hiding in the kitchen elevator for 5 minutes. Bored, she decided to change locations, but just a few steps in, Alex dragged her back into a room. They tried to explain the situation. Someone entered, so they quickly hid behind the bed.
Georgie, lo so che sei qui. Georgie!
Over here! Guys, I found her!
Suddenly, Grace heard urgent shouts outside. The maid, who had been searching for the mischievous kids, was mistaken for Grace and shot in the head. A crowd rushed in, only to find they had killed the wrong person. Grace was terrified, with tears in her eyes, but she tightly covered her mouth, not daring to make a sound. Tony and Becky complained. The daughter shouldn't have been so reckless. They instructed her to not kill Grace immediately, as a ritual sacrifice was still needed. Grace was left in shock, unable to comprehend why her new family wanted her dead. After everyone left, Alex led Grace into a secret passage and changed her shoes to something more suitable for running.
They think that if they don't kill you, something very bad will happen to the family. Now, I had to play along so that I can get you out, but the house is on lockdown right now, so it's gonna be really tricky. When you marry into this family, you have to play a game, and if you don't, you die. I know that sounds crazy, but you have to believe me, it is real. It happened to my great uncle. He got married, he didn't play a game. Next morning, he died. His wife too. Same thing happened to my cousin Rachel. Same thing happened to a bunch of people that I never even met before.
When she heard what Alex said, Grace nearly exploded with anger. Why hadn't he told her about all this in advance? Alex knew that if he told her the truth, she'd immediately leave him. He didn't want to lose Grace, so he chose to take a risk. After all, his brother and sister-in-law had drawn ordinary games, but now, it was too late for regrets. Although Alex didn't believe in curses, it was part of his family's tradition, and he couldn't break it. He could only try to help Grace escape quietly. He told her to hide in the kitchen, where there was a door leading outside, and he would monitor the others' movements from the surveillance room and unlock the door for her. At this time, Fitch, the brother-in-law hiding in the toilet, heard movement upstairs through the ventilation duct, but he simply ignored it because he had not yet learned how to use a crossbow. His real goal was to delay things. He didn't want to participate in the killing. But his wife, on the other hand, was unusually excited. She was eager to prove herself. Elsewhere, Grace, having just left the secret passage, encountered a group carrying a body. As she turned to run in the opposite direction, miraculously, she dodged the bullets, or else half the family would have been killed by the younger sister, Grace, by accident. found herself in the game room. She tried to escape through a window but discovered that every window was locked, except for the door. Just then, footsteps sounded outside. With nowhere to hide, Grace pressed herself against the wall, standing right next to the secret door. Thankfully, it was Daniel who entered. 30 years ago, when he was a child, he had played a game of hide-and-seek himself. He never understood the family rules and still didn't. Because he loved his younger brother, he wouldn't kill Grace, but he also wouldn't help her. After letting her go, he loudly called for the others. The first to arrive was his wife, full of confidence about the hunt tonight, recalling how, when she married into the family, her husband had told her about the family's games. She hadn't been scared. Compared to her hellish past, she was willing to risk everything to be part of this family. Luckily, she'd drawn an ordinary game. Gradually, everyone gathered in the game room. The younger sister and Fitch thought the game was over and only came out to find out that Grace had still not been found. The younger sister panicked, and her weapon had long been lost. So, Fitch gave her his crossbow, and the next second, disaster struck. The game was far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. 2 innocent people had already lost their lives in the first round. To avoid further casualties, they decided to turn the surveillance system back on. With that, everyone split up. Unfortunately, Alex had already beaten them to the surveillance room. Meanwhile, Grace had reached the kitchen and stolen a hunting rifle from another room. While waiting for Alex to unlock the door for her, the butler appeared. Grace carefully loaded the gun, preparing for her escape. Just as Alex unlocked the door, Grace stepped out, ready to shoot the butler, but to her shock, the gun in her hand was just a toy, a decorative piece on the wall. Fortunately, Grace reacted quickly and poured hot water over the butler's head. Seizing the chance to escape, outside, her father-in-law and Daniel were angrily banging on the door. To keep her location a secret, Alex smashed the surveillance system. Enraged, the Tony at his son, but luckily, the brother was there to calmly soothe Alex. Otherwise, Alex might have ended up choking his father to death, but the father couldn't let it go and knocked Alex unconscious. Meanwhile, after leaving the kitchen, Grace had intended to hide in the elevator again but found a maid already inside. She begged the maid to switch places, but the maid coldly refused and reported her position. Before Grace could fully enter the elevator, the door was slammed shut, crushing her. As Grace fled, the butler chased after her. Today, only 3 maids remained at the old house, and now they were all gone. The remaining family members went to report that the surveillance and door systems were beyond repair, and every window and door could be opened freely. Helpless, they were forced to tie Alex to the bed. At that moment, the aunt couldn't hold it in any longer and angrily chastised her brother for not properly educating his son, allowing him to betray the family. Centuries ago, their ancestors, driven by a thirst for power and wealth, made a terrifying pact with Satan. Though it was inhumane, it granted them endless riches and privilege. Now, Alex is the heir to this dark legacy, though he still needs time to fully accept the truth. However, all of their conversation was overheard by Grace. Hidden outside the window, she no longer harbored any illusions about this family and only had one goal: escape the manor. Ignoring the danger, she jumped down from the 2nd floor. Luckily, the drop wasn't too high, and she wasn't injured. She bolted toward the front gate, but halfway there, she encountered someone searching the area. She quickly hid in the sheep pen. To her surprise, the person followed right behind her. As the beam of the flashlight grew closer, Grace finally recognized the figure. It was the young son of her sister-in-law. Relieved it was just a child, she tried to reason with him, hoping he'd help her, but before she could finish speaking, the boy pulled out a gun. Fortunately, he missed, and the bullet only grazed her palm. When he tried to fire again, he discovered there was only one bullet left. Looking at the hole in her palm, Grace angrily punched the boy, as she grabbed the flashlight to continue her escape. A startled sheep caused her to stumble and fall into a cellar behind her. The stench was overwhelming, making Grace gag. As she took in her surroundings, she saw piles of white bones, victims of the Ludomus family's monstrous tradition. Fortunately, there was a ladder on the wall, which allowed Grace to climb out. However, it was old and rickety, barely able to support her weight. She made it to the top just as the ladder gave way beneath her. Though she was in pain, she pressed on, using her injured hand to support herself. She quickly bandaged her hand with her sleeve, Driven by her overwhelming desire to escape, she sprinted toward the front gate, but Charity, who had been smoking upstairs, spotted her. Charity's eyes lit up with excitement. She almost shot Grace on the spot but missed. Allowing Grace to escape, Charity immediately informed the injured but still functional butler of Grace's direction. Meanwhile, Grace had reached the gate but couldn't muster enough strength to climb over with just one hand. After scanning the area, she noticed a loose fence rail. Using her body weight, she broke it off and squeezed through the gap. A passing car saw Grace's disheveled state but refused to help. As it was a wealthy neighborhood, with the sound of an approaching vehicle, Grace had no choice but to flee into the forest. But not far into her run, she collided with the butler. Both of them fought fiercely, and Grace briefly managed to strangle the butler into unconsciousness. However, she mistakenly believed she had killed him. Having a vehicle now seemed like an advantage, but it turned out the car was equipped with AI. As she tried to dial the police through the car's system, it locked her out after discovering the car had been marked for decommission. This sudden action threw Grace off balance. Before she could think of another escape plan, the butler reappeared and injected her with a tranquilizer, knocking her out. When Grace woke up, the butler was excitedly reporting her location to Tony, even cranking the music up to celebrate. Grace's luck had run out, with wave after wave of pursuers closing in. Just as she climbed out, Daniel caught her red-handed, face to face with a gun. Grace wasn't frightened, knowing Daniel well enough to realize he wouldn't hurt her. She begged him to let her go. Although Daniel didn't want to be part of this absurd game, the pressure from the family forced him to knock Grace unconscious. Her father was nearby, and Daniel had no choice. Grace was dragged back to the manor and restrained on a table. At this point, the family had donned ceremonial attire and circled around her, preparing for the final ritual. Tony held a cup of liquid in his hand, chanting a sacrificial incantation as he stood before Grace. After everyone drank the mysterious liquid, Tony raised a short knife, preparing to stab her. Unknown to the others, Daniel, unwilling to let the family continue this absurd game, had secretly added a small amount of poison to their drinks. It wasn't fatal, but it was enough to buy Grace some time to escape. However, Daniel's prediction was wrong. His wife soon recovered and chased after with a gun in hands. Daniel assumed she wouldn't shoot, given their many years of marriage. But once again, he was wrong. He forgot that his wife valued money over life. As Daniel fell, Grace, provoked by the sight, immediately lunged at Charity in a desperate struggle. Unfortunately, her gun was out of bullets, so she had no choice but to knock Charity unconscious instead. When her brother arrived to save her, it was too late. Daniel had already passed away. None of the family would stop Grace now, or they'd all meet their doom. Tony, incapable of standing up to Grace's fury, quickly passed out. Grace grabbed a wooden box nearby and began wildly attacking Becky. Unfortunately, Alex witnessed this scene. Although he didn't like his mother, Alex couldn't accept the fact that she had been killed. On top of that, the brother he cherished most in the family had also died. Alex no longer hesitated. He pretended to comfort his wife, but in reality, he was controlling her. The aunt arrived, ordering the family to speed up the ritual since dawn was approaching. Together, they restrained Grace, and this time, Alex himself would carry out the sacrifice. With cries of "Hail Satan!" Alex raised his dagger. But in the span of just a few seconds, dawn broke, signaling the end of the game. Grace had won. The family froze in place, terror-stricken, waiting for their punishment. After a long, tense silence, nothing happened. Everyone exhaled in relief, awkwardly standing around, unsure of what to do next. Just as they were beginning to think it was all a lie, only the aunt understood the truth. She declared she would kill Grace in front of the ancestors. The curse was real. No one in the Ludomus family survived.